There is often a moment when you notice you are not part of anything. Not in a dramatic way, no argument, no rejection, just a quiet awareness that you don't belong to the group around you. You might be standing among people, listening, nodding, smiling at the right times. You understand what they're talking about, you can follow the jokes, the plans, the shared language, and yet something in you stays separate. It doesn't feel like shyness, it doesn't feel like fear. It feels more like watching from a step back, even when you're physically present. You notice how easily others move together, how they agree without speaking, how they know what matters and what doesn't. They seem to share an invisible map. You don't feel lost exactly, you just don't feel on that map. Sometimes you try to fit in, you adjust your tone, you soften your edges, you participate just enough. It works on the surface, but inside, nothing settles. Other times, you stop trying. You let the distance exist. You stay polite, you stay kind. You just don't push yourself into a shape that doesn't hold you. From the inside, this doesn't always feel painful. Sometimes it feels neutral, sometimes even calm. There is space here, less noise, fewer rules to follow without knowing why. But there are moments when it stings. When you see groups forming easily, when invitations move around you instead of toward you, when belonging seems automatic for others and complicated for you. You might wonder if something is wrong with you, if you missed a step everyone else learned early, if fitting in is a skill you never picked up. And yet, when you imagine fully merging, something inside resists, not loudly, just quietly. As if becoming part of the group would cost you something you're not willing to lose. You may notice that without a group, your life moves differently, slower, more inward. You make choices without checking if they align with anyone else's expectations. You think longer before you speak. You listen more than you join. You don't feel held by a collective identity. There's no we to lean on, just I. That can feel lonely at times, but it can also feel honest, clean, like standing on your own ground, even if that ground isn't crowded. You go home, you sit with yourself. The quiet feels familiar. Not fitting in doesn't always feel like rejection. Sometimes it feels like living without a group because none of them ever felt like home. Jung would start by looking inward, not outward. He would say that when someone doesn't participate, the first thing to notice is not the behavior but the inner movement that comes before it. Before explanation, before choice. A sensation appears, a tightening, a hesitation, sometimes even a sense of relief. Something inside responds quietly to the situation long before words are formed. From this view, not fitting in is not immediately a problem, it's a signal. Jung was always interested in signals that come from beneath awareness. Small emotional shifts, bodily reactions, a sense of pull or resistance that doesn't announce itself clearly. When someone stands among others and feels separate, Jung would ask what part of the psyche is stepping back and why. You wouldn't rush to label it fear. Fear is loud. This experience is often subtle. It can feel calm, neutral, even grounded. Jung would notice that the person may feel more present inside themselves when they don't merge with the group, more intact, less fragmented. That alone tells him something important is happening. Jung believed that the psyche organizes itself around balance. When the outer world becomes too loud, too fast, too aligned, something inside may compensate by withdrawing. Not as punishment, not as failure, but as protection, a way of preserving inner order. From this angle, distance is not absence, it's structure. He would also pay attention to the parts of the self that learned early how to observe rather than join, parts that stayed back to remain whole. These parts often carry intelligence, not damage. They learned that fitting in can come at a cost, that belonging sometimes requires shrinking or splitting off pieces of oneself. Withdrawal here is not escape, it's containment. At the same time, Jung would not deny the tension. He knew the psyche is rarely unified. Alongside the part that pulls back, there may be another that longs, a part that notices warmth nearby and wonders what it would feel like to step closer. Jung never forced one part to defeat the other. He allowed opposites to exist together. That coexistence is not confusion, it's depth. From Jung's perspective, not fitting in often marks a person who is more attuned to their inner life than to collective rhythm, someone who feels the cost of adaptation more sharply, someone whose psyche resists becoming automatic. This resistance isn't heroic, it isn't tragic, it's simply how this inner system maintains itself. He would say that when you don't join, something in you is asking to be seen, not corrected. And when you notice that inner movement without judging it, the experience changes. It stops being a flaw and becomes information, a quiet message from the self saying, "This is where I stay whole." That, for Jung, is not pathology, it's orientation. Nietzsche would look at this situation and immediately turn his attention to the story that forms around it. Not the inner feeling, but the explanation that appears once behavior is seen by others. When someone doesn't fit in, doesn't join, doesn't move with the group, Nietzsche would say, that meaning rushes in to cover the discomfort this creates. He was deeply suspicious of what societies call normal. He saw normality not as truth, but as agreement repeated so often it stops being questioned. From his view, fitting in is rarely neutral. It's rewarded, praised, and framed as health, strength, or maturity. Refusing to fit in, even quietly, threatens that framework. So a story is built to contain it. That story tends to be moral. It doesn't just describe the behavior, it judges it. Not joining becomes weakness. Distance becomes coldness. Silence becomes lack. Nietzsche would notice how quickly value is assigned, how easily preference is turned into virtue and difference into failure. The story doesn't ask why someone steps back, it decides what that step back must mean. What matters to Nietzsche is not whether the judgment is accurate, but what it protects. By labeling refusal as something lesser, the collective protects its own choices from being questioned. If opting out is framed as deficiency, then opting in never has to be examined. Participation stays unquestioned. The group remains innocent. Nietzsche would also see how uncomfortable it is for people to encounter someone who does not want what they want. Desire is often contagious. Shared wanting creates stability. When someone stands nearby without sharing that desire, it introduces doubt. It suggests that the thing everyone is moving toward might not be necessary after all. That suggestion is unsettling. So the story tightens. People explain the difference away. They reassure themselves that the outsider must secretly want to belong, that they'll understand later, that they're missing something obvious. These explanations are not cruel. Nietzsche would see them as defensive. They are ways of closing a crack before it spreads. From this lens, not fitting in becomes dangerous not because it disrupts the group directly, but because it reveals that the group's values are not universal. They are chosen, inherited, repeated. And anything that reveals choice also reveals responsibility. Nietzsche knew how heavy that realization can be. He would say that many moral judgments exist not to guide behavior, but to make certain behaviors unthinkable. When refusal is framed as failure, most people won't risk it. They won't even consider it. The story does its job quietly. Nietzsche does not step in to correct the story. He doesn't replace it with a better one. He simply exposes that it is a story, that it serves those who tell it, and that someone who doesn't fit in is not necessarily lost, broken, or afraid. They may simply be unwilling to live inside a meaning they didn't choose. From his perspective, the quiet refusal to fit in is not a message to others. It's a private alignment. And the discomfort it creates says more about the story being protected than about the person standing outside it. Fromm would look at what happens next, not inside the person and not inside the story, but in the space between people. He was interested in belonging, not as comfort, but as safety. From his view, the need to belong is not shallow. It's rooted in fear. Fear of isolation, fear of standing alone without protection. When someone doesn't fit in, Fromm would notice how quickly the atmosphere changes. Often nothing is said, no confrontation, no exclusion that can be named, but the tone shifts. Invitations become less direct, assumptions are made without checking. The group continues, but the shape tightens slightly. Fromm believed that many people join groups not because they deeply agree, but because belonging offers relief. It removes the burden of choosing alone. It answers questions before they are asked. It provides a shared direction so the individual doesn't have to face uncertainty by themselves. From this angle, conformity is not about weakness, it's about comfort. So when someone stands nearby without merging, it can feel threatening, not because they are doing anything wrong, but because they remind others of a choice they would rather forget exists. The choice to stand alone. The choice to live without the cushion of we. Fromm would say that this is why difference is often smoothed over, encouraged gently back into place. You'll feel better if you join. It's easier when you're part of something. These statements sound kind, and often they are, but underneath them is anxiety, the anxiety of a group that needs its shape to remain intact. There is also the fear that difference spreads, that if one person can step back and survive, others might start to wonder why they are staying in. This is not conscious, it's emotional. Groups protect themselves by normalizing belonging and pathologizing distance. Not aggressively, quietly. Fromm would notice that the person who doesn't fit in often senses this pressure, even when it's unspoken. They feel the subtle pull to adjust, to reassure, to explain, to soften the discomfort of others. Sometimes they comply, not because they want to belong, but because they don't want to disturb. Other times they don't. And that refusal creates distance, whether they intend it or not. From this lens, loneliness is not just the absence of people, it's the absence of shared reassurance. And yet, Fromm was careful here. He didn't believe that belonging was always healthy. He warned about groups that offer safety at the cost of individuality, about identities that dissolve the person into the collective. So when someone doesn't fit in, Fromm wouldn't rush to fix it. He would ask what kind of belonging is being offered, and what kind of self would be required to accept it. Sometimes stepping away is not rejection, it's preservation. In that sense, the quiet distance that forms is not only loss, it's also clarity, a recognition that belonging can soothe fear, but it can also silence parts of the self. And not everyone is willing to pay that price. Fromm would leave it there, not as advice, just as observation. Arendt would pay attention to how little needs to happen for someone to fall slightly out of place. No announcement is made, no rule is spoken aloud, the group doesn't gather to decide anything, and yet something shifts. Participation, she would say, is rarely enforced through force. It is maintained through habit. Most social life is built on repetition, doing what has been done before, showing up in the same ways, responding at the expected moments. Over time, these patterns stop feeling optional. They become the background of normal life. You don't question them because they don't announce themselves as choices. They simply feel like how things are done. From Arendt's perspective, this is where conformity becomes powerful, not because people are cruel, but because systems of behavior stabilize themselves. When someone doesn't fit in, doesn't participate fully, doesn't repeat the gesture, the rhythm is interrupted. Not enough to cause conflict, just enough to be noticed. What follows is often subtle adjustment. Conversations continue without waiting. Decisions are made assuming agreement. Invitations are shaped around those who reliably show up. The person who doesn't quite fit is not excluded directly. They are simply not built into the flow anymore. The group moves as if they are optional. Arendt would notice how quiet this process is. No one has to intend harm. No one has to explain themselves. Social order maintains itself by favoring predictability. Those who match the pattern are carried along. Those who don't are left to stand still, even if they remain physically present. For the person on the outside, this isn't always immediately painful. Sometimes it feels neutral. Sometimes it even feels clean. There is less pressure to perform, less need to anticipate expectations. But over time, the distance becomes real. Not because anyone pushed them away, but because the space around them stopped adjusting to include them. Arendt was deeply concerned with how easily people accept these processes without reflection, how normal behavior becomes a kind of quiet rule, how participation turns into proof of belonging, and how refusal, even when calm and dignified, can be read as disruption. She would say that this is how social worlds protect themselves, not through punishment, but through continuation. The group keeps going, the rituals repeat, the structure remains intact, and anyone who doesn't move with it learns slowly where they stand. There is no final moment here, no confrontation, no resolution, just an understanding that not all forms of life are equally supported by collective rhythm. Some people move alongside it, others remain slightly out of sync. This is quieter than it looks.